Today we're going to be doing a quick deck tech on Lantern Control, kind of going over the deck, explaining it, what it is if you've never seen it before, kind of going over the key cards, why we've made certain card choices, looking at sideboard cards, and just overall kind of a short overview of the deck. If you've never seen Lantern Control before, it kind of revolves around two cards, the first being Lantern of Insight, which means both players play with the top card of their library revealed. And then if you pair that with something like Codex Shredder, which taps to have a player mill a card, you're then able to control what your opponent draws. Now, in most cases, you're not going to be able to keep them off creatures. Some things are going to get through. So kind of the third piece of our deck is Ensnaring Bridge, which says creatures with power greater than the number of cards in your hand can't attack. At most points in the game, kind of beyond turn 4, we are going to try to have 0 cards in hand, effectively meaning that creatures can't attack. So if you pair Lantern of Insight, Codex Shredder, and Ensnaring Bridge, you're generally going to do quite well against most decks in the meta. A lot of people kind of think Lantern Control, it must be a control deck, but I think it's actually correct to frame this as a combo deck, where you're trying to most efficiently and as quickly as possible get your 3-card combo of Lantern, Codex Shredder, and Ensnaring Bridge on the battlefield, as you're very likely to win from that point. Now, the rest of the deck is kind of built around either getting to that point or protecting it once you do get to that point. You may notice we are white-black, so just Orzhov colors. Traditionally, some lists have played Ancient Stirrings, but given that we're a combo deck, we are electing to play Profane Tutor. Simple has Suspend 2 and lets you search for any card. So I think many of our efficient play patterns go turn 2, Suspend Tutor, and then turn 4 we get the missing piece of our combo, land it, and attempt to win the game from here. Now, between Lantern and Shredder, obviously we're able to control what they draw. However, anything that they start with in their opening hand, that doesn't have an answer to. So we supplement that top control lock with Hand Disruption. Obviously, Thoughtseize is kind of the best hand removal spell in Modern, so we're gonna play it. Generally, when you Thoughtseize, you're taking cards that interact with the lock and not things that are just creatures. For example, something like Tarmogoyf is never really a Thoughtseize target, as Ensnaring Bridge just stops it from attacking, so you don't really care about it. Duress, I think, is our choice currently due to the high presence of cards like the One Ring, and then in post-board games, things like Force of Vigor, or cards like Leyline Binding that get hit by Duress and not Inquisition. So for a long time, Inquisition was our second discard spell, but I think Duress is actually starting to outpace it a little. Even things like Blood Moon, Duress still hits most of the cards that we care about, as things that are just creatures matter less to us. We also have Prismatic Ending, can shut down a lot of early hate or early aggression. So anything that they kind of get on the board, I think Prismatic Ending just being the most efficient removal spell in Modern, I think is really key. You're able to kill things like Ragavan on turn 1, DRC, kind of slow down those very aggressive starts. You can remove something like an Amulet very efficiently, and so I think it's kind of our key removal slot. Some people play Assassin's Trophy. I'm more of a fan of Pending. I like it better, but either way, you're generally playing 4 removal spells. And then additionally, you're playing Mishra's Bauble, kind of to dig for a next card, and it can also be very good with something like Codex Shredder, where you can look at your top card and then mill it if it's bad, allowing you to dig even more. Moving on to some of the singleton cards, Ghoul-Caller's Bell is just similar to Codex Shredder, but it's going to mill both players. Again, you can only play 4 Shredders, so we kind of have to look at the next option, and that's Ghoul-Caller Bell and Pixis. Pixis can be very important as it exiles instead of mill, so a lot of decks, if there's an Emrakul or a Shuffle effect on top, or if it's a deck that's very reliant on their graveyard, Pixis is often better, as you're able to exile key threats. It does have a second ability, but the second ability rarely comes up. The deck is by no means built to take advantage of it, so it's there. rarely comes up. Now, one of the key cards that this deck got during Modern Horizons 2 was Urza's Saga, and it's actually perfect for the deck, giving us colorless mana, but then the third chapter, just allowing us to tutor for either Lantern or Shredder, I think is very, very powerful, and that also lets us play a couple singleton cards that cost 1 or 0 that we're able to get with Saga in the right matchup. The first is the Underworld Cookbook, which allows us to discard cards to create food. This is really efficient against Burn, Domain Zoo it can be good against, kind of any very aggressive decks. Cookbook is very, very strong against, as against something like Burn, if every card we draw we just discard and make a food, we gain 3, okay, they draw a Lightning Bolt, deal 3 to us, we gain 3, we're winning the game. Yes, our main win con is mill. Eventually we'll just mill them out. And the second is Grafdigger's Cage, which allows us to shut down any kind of graveyard reanimation strategies, anything along those lines, like Snapcaster Mage gets played less but still comes up in a lot of matchups. And finally we have Pithing Needle. Cards like Boseiju, Odawara seeing a ton of play, and lots of creatures printed nowadays have activated abilities. Cards like the One Ring, things out of Tron, a lot of targets for the Needle, and I think that's why we are playing the full 4 main and side. I like to have 3 main deck, just basically every deck has some need for Needle. I actually have a guide of what to name with Pithing Needle when you play it, so there should be a card that pops up here. Now, when we talk about the mana base, Academy Ruins is our only our utility land, and I think it's still a good card. We can make blue off either Glimmervoid or Spire of Industry, and it can be very useful as we mill cards, getting them back, and if we need to sacrifice Lantern, kind of last ditch, it does have that second line where we can sacrifice it to have one player shuffle. And additionally, it's good against something like mill, where we can ensure that we don't mill out, even if our opponent kind of catches us with an endurance or something like that late. As for the rest of the mana base, a couple basics. Honestly, the basics are some of the worst lands in the deck. Don't really like running them, but I think they're kind of a necessary evil against things like Field of Ruin, those type of effects. Concealed Courtyard is probably the best land in the deck because it's basically always untapped and gives us both our colors. Same thing with Caves, untapped and allows us to either cast Hand Disruption or Prismatic Ending on turn 1, and so I think that's very important for this deck. Moving on to the sideboard here, I'd say they're kind of divided into almost 3 categories. The first is singleton targets to get with Urza's Saga, so that's going to include cards like Welding Jar against things that bring in Artifact Destruction, Nihil Spellbomb against graveyard decks. The 4th Pithing Needle actually comes in pretty frequently, and Stone of Eric, again a very like shutting off graveyard, good against Yawgmoth, anything like that. It was good against Scam, things like they can't bring back Grief, matters less now with Ephemerate, but pre-ban it was very important. The second is kind of cards that we play 2 of, which are usually can hit with Profane Tutor, so effectively allowing us to play 6 copies of those cards, which includes things like Cursed Totem is there for like Yawgmoth and Hardened Scales, Damping Sphere, Tron, Storm style decks. Tron's definitely a hard matchup, and I think because we're on Prismatic Ending over Assassin's Trophy and we're not able to hit the Tron lands, I think Damping Sphere is a key sideboard card. Something like Hushbringer, very good against ETB's Deaths. I have another video card here where we show Hushbringer just absolutely stonewalls a Blink deck. Surgical Extraction, kind of, we only play 1 main if we need to get with Profane Tutor, but I think there are lots of decks where we can shut them down with Surgical. And the final slot is Leyline of Sanctity. You can play 4 here, currently testing 3. A good card against Burn, anything that targets you. It can be good against Creativity, Scam it was very good against, so I think it's just quite a strong card in the meta overall. Of course, there'll be a link to this deck list in the description. That's just a quick guide to Lantern. If you have any recommendations for cards, would love to hear them. And if you want to, see where the brewing goes on, there's always lots of discussion in the Lantern Control Discord. I have a link to that in my channel description. if you want to join and talk about Lantern, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully this was helpful and can kind of explain the core interactions of Lantern and why we play certain cards. So in the meantime, keep grinding Lantern and look forward to continuing to play with this deck.